miss the intel about the next generation of Bulldogs. This is Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger.
Let's go, I'm a Bulldog.
Hello, Dog Nation, and welcome into Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Dog Nation recruiting insider Jeff Sentell. And my, oh my, I didn't even really know where we should start with this show because there's so many different ways that we could go. Obviously, we had to talk about the Jackson Cantwell decision today. But to start it off, it may not have been a win for the Dogs. But the whole weekend was a win for myself and Jeff Sentell. We got to do a lot of cool things in Springfield, Missouri. Got to have a lot of bonding time and experience living like the locals.
It was funny. It was not choreographed whatsoever, although Miss Mansell is very stylish. But we both wore it black today. Maybe it was in mourning for the five-star offensive tackle in Georgia. But I've been on a lot of these, Dog Nation. You guys have been on a lot of these with us. So we're going to take you a little bit around the town a little bit, hang out with us a little bit, but we're also going to go behind the curtain a little bit, go behind backstage for something in this show that you guys will want to hang out in.
So we'll show you the first set of pictures here. We love a good visual aid, and for those that are listening on podcasts, we'll try to describe it to you. We were told by the locals that Springfield is a food town. There's not much to do, but there's a lot of places to eat. Jeff and I definitely found that out. I have to say that the star of the show for the weekend was this custard that you see here on the right. These places are like, I described it as churches and Dollar Generals in the southeast where you can take a rock while you're standing at one, throw it and hit another. They were everywhere. That was probably the highlight of day one, was getting to have some delicious custard.
Look at the photo in the middle is Kaylee's nouveau artistic capture image of, like, even the custards are towering. They're tall. The custards themselves. The signs, the marquees in front of the shops or something. We sampled the food, but like, I want to pay close intel decisions here. Like, Kaylee got a triple chocolate amazing explosion. And I got something that was vanilla custard with melted chocolate chips and strawberries all swirled together. And this was a first. Kaylee is normally the one that orders perfectly every time. And for me, I actually out-ordered Kaylee on that one with a better menu selection. That's a rarity. That's a rarity right there.
I don't want to admit defeat, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next picture here. We've got some more things to show you. So we try not to give out too many plugs on this show for free anyway, but there's something in Springfield, Missouri. It's the OG outdoor store. You've probably been to one before. It's the first one ever, and it was humongous. It was like going to a resort. You'll see the picture on the left and the one in the center. You've got Jeff next to the fisherman. Like, that was one of the coolest experiences of the weekend. And this last place that I took a picture of, we found this fascinating. This is the local place, so we'll shout them out. It's called Casper's, and on the sign out there it says established in 1909. I don't know if I've ever seen a building or a restaurant that's been around since 1909.
I mean, she was fascinated by it. Their sign sort of looked like a derivative of McDonald's a little bit, kind of like McDowell's, McDonald's. You know what I mean? If you guys have watched some Eddie Murphy movies, you know what I'm talking about. But like that was a really interesting experience. The Bass Pro Shops, I got to give 10 seconds on this. Literally, there's a museum in the middle of it, like an aquarium. I hear it's not quite the Georgia Aquarium, but a little better than the Tennessee Aquarium, which is a pretty mid 3-star, low 4-star aquarium. And it costs $45 to get in. And then they've got like the whole Bass Pro Shops mall wrapped around it. Folks, there is a bar and a cafe. There's probably a good Jeff Foxworthy joke in there, like, you know you're a redneck if you find yourself intoxicated in the restaurant inside Bass Pro Shops.
We did not do that, though, for the record.
We were working.
But we're walking around looking at the animals, and we're reminded of something that makes us feel really close to home. I actually threw this up on X yesterday. When in Springfield, you've got to visit the OG Bass Pro Shop. But even in Missouri, Jeff and I were reminded that it had been 1,648, now 49 days since the Gators had beaten the Bulldogs. They had that gator right in the center of the thing. Jeff and I were very fascinated by it, and you can't see it. It was too hard to clarify out in the picture, but they had a small sign and it said, "Please do not throw money at the gator."
Yeah, there's an NIL joke in there, right?
Tons.
Like, the other thing Kaylee was sitting there going, "Man, this gator has not moved." And I was like, well, It's kind of like Billy Napier's offense in the SEC, I guess.
Yeah, in the background of that video, you can actually hear Jeff and I discussing if it's alive or not. So now that we've gotten through our adventures of Springfield, Missouri, we got to get to the big news. So we'll show you what we've got going on today's show. We're going to open it up just with a banger. This was our personal experience of all the behind-the-scenes stuff that went down in the Jackson Cantwell decision. Think of this as spilling the tea, because that's what Jeff and I are going to do today. Then we'll kind of go over what we took away from Dog Nation's one-on-one interview with him, why it looked like he leaned Miami, even though his relationship with Georgia seemed really solid. So how did that all play out? And then because Cantwell is now going to Miami, who does Georgia go after next at the offensive tackle position? After that, Georgia had another commit over the weekend, the 4-star safety Jordan Smith. So what we know about him and the impact that he'll be able to make within the 2026 class. And then a scavenger hunt this weekend, so we'll do a full breakdown of the official visitors. Let's start with this. If Jeff and I were not in the career that we were, I truly and honestly believe that we could have a career in, I guess it would be the athletic equivalent of corporate espionage.
Wow.
Because we were like spies this weekend. We just kept happening to be in the right place at the right time. Starting the day that we get there, we end up in the Nixa High School weight room where we see 2 Oregon coaches talking with Jackson Cantwell. As soon as we walk in, they're trying to dip out, but we still saw them. And then we get into day 2, and it's like just when you think things couldn't get any weirder, they start to. So I'll let Jeff tell you how it all went down.
So, first of all, you're not going to believe this. Go ahead and just go, I don't believe it. Just go ahead and get those out of the way right now. So this is one of those things when my career, hopefully 15, 20, 25, 30, I'm not going to work until 85 like Brandon Adams probably.
Yeah.
But when the book comes out of all the behind the scenes, this will be a chapter. And what did we do last week? We did the like Kaylee and I, upon advice from the locals, you saw earlier, we got advice to go all those places, right? We were told to go to a local barbecue restaurant approximately 1.5 miles away from Nixa High School. This is like 2.5 hours before his ceremony. And Jackson even told me about it. This was a place where he'd had an NIL deal with this place. Mm-hmm. And so we roll up, it's probably 12:30-ish, I would imagine. And immediately we go to our table and I notice something. And then I walk by and we sit down in our booth, probably, I don't know, 6 yards away, maybe 8 yards away. There's a conversation happening. And the particulars there are Drew Rosenhaus of Rosenhaus Sports Representation, his associate Kyle, and then the Cantwell family. Now, Jackson was at school, doing what he does. I think he's got a 3.7 GPA. But they were literally talking about the decision. They were talking about Miami. They were talking about the fit, Coach Cristobal, Coach Mirabal, the offensive line coach, places to go in Miami, what the fit will be like. And literally, this is just right when all those early crystal ball predictions were dropping about Miami. And I kind of told Kaylee, this is kind of like, you go there thinking Georgia has a really good shot. Like for us, the way we cover Georgia is I need to be where the biggest Georgia recruiting news is every day. And Kaylee's an amazing wingman for all this, a wing co-host with all this. Wing woman, I think that's appropriate. Sure. But like we're sitting there and, Georgia may have took the L with Cantwell, but either he chooses Georgia or he doesn't choose Georgia. It's still an amazing story. We feel at Dog Nation we want to be your source for all your recruiting news. That's why we're there. And I don't know if a lot of people really get that, but like you literally heard the A to Z. I'm purposely leaving out some details for the book, but I told Kaylee, you already had a feeling it was going to be Georgia and then Miami, and then the information you heard that morning was Miami. But then literally in loud stereo sound, you have the goods coming down on the Jackson Cantwell decision, probably 2.5 hours, maybe before the decision was shared with the public. And I kind of told Kaylee, this is kind of like doing what we do, like knowing everything you're getting for Christmas, and maybe mom and dad got the wrong G.I. Joe or the wrong Transformer. That's what that whole situation was like. Now, Jackson's a good dude. He has his reasons, which we'll explore into it later. But I looked over at Kaylee and I said, this never happens like that, where you literally, and being the professionals that we are, we didn't really try to, spoil anything or release anything. But because the one thing you have to, as a professional that's been around a lot of these things can change, and maybe things might have changed in the 2.5 hours leading up, because that's happened a lot of times in the recruiting business and they're covering these recruits. But you certainly saw a good preamble or a good preview of what actually came to be a couple hours later.
Yeah, the tricky part is like right before we had sat down, that's when all the expert reports of the crystal ball picks had switched from Georgia to Miami, and all this is coming out right before we go to this lunch. And then it's like, okay, yeah, you say that, but there's still, a lot of time left before this happens. And then we go and sit down, and obviously all of that happens. And it's like, okay, we got that clarification. We feel like pretty confident in this based on the things that were being said at this lunch. But where my mind kept going to is, what if those predictions were never put in? What if we just heard that? I mean, it's such a tricky situation to be in, but I think Jeff said it best. It's like when you know what you're about to open for your Christmas present, and at the same time it's still not what you want. Now you got to give all congratulations to Jackson Cantwell, because at the end of the day, like, this is somebody's dream coming true, and maybe this really is where he feels he can develop into the best football version and player of himself. But definitely was a tricky recruitment to follow, because it felt like there was a new leader all the time. And I guess out of the 4 hats that were up there, maybe the one that he chose made the least sense to me.
It's funny. It's kind of like a good lesson for anybody that wants to have a career in the media or in journalism. Technology makes things really easy these days, or social media makes things really easy these days. But I still go back on some really old lessons as a young journalist, when I was told you need to be there and you need to be as close to the story as possible. So being on the scene and seeing it for yourself, certainly we're able to add a chapter to that story. I think two things that are takeaways, like our good friend Connor Riley has a winners and losers column about a lot of Georgia games or whatever, or Georgia events. And, everybody took it as Miami kind of coming in late. Choose your own reason, whether it's financial. Jackson chose development. Jackson chose relationships for his reasons. But 2 big losers, I thought, in this was you got Oregon now that has lost 2 straight high-profile recruitments, especially some that can carry the NIL tag, when that's something that Oregon should be able to handle. Like in Miami's world, they can play ball with Miami, go blow for blow with financials. And then the other one, it was clearly dawned on me as we were in the state of Missouri, and Missouri wasn't even a hat on the table for Jackson Cantwell, and they have these special laws now made by their state legislature where a high schooler that's going to an in-state school can already get NIL while they're still in high school. So everybody looks at it at the Dawgs, and we're going to talk about where they go from here and everything else. But those are 2 programs I think that also maybe caught some collateral damage as well.
Even though Georgia wasn't able to pick up Jackson Cantwell at the end of the day, I think a lot about the program was said when he was discussing his recruitment process with them, because you always say follow the visits, and Jackson Cantwell's most recent visit was to Georgia, and I don't think it was like he left on these bad terms. So we're going to let you listen to this, and then Jeff and I will come back and talk about, despite all the good things that he says, where did things go wrong? So this was Jackson Cantwell and his relationship over time with Georgia.
Jackson, what did that last trip to Georgia look like and feel like with Jared? What was the final pitch they gave you?
Well, I had a great time with those guys. There's a lot of good people in Georgia. And again, tying back to what I said about it's hard to please everybody in this process, because Jared's a great dude. I love spending time with him. I think I spent time with Drew Bobo that weekend. Very quality dude. He seems like he's got a similar mindset to me, and he's very locked in on football. He just wants to get better. And the staff made a great push, and I love spending time with them. I had a great time with those guys. I think they're great people. I think Stacey Searles has been absolutely one of my favorite people throughout this recruiting process. That was kind of when my recruitment blew up, is whenever the Dawgs offered me in July of 2023, and I can't thank those guys enough for how much time they put into me.
I think it's really tricky because you listen to that, and that sounds like somebody who just committed to the University of Georgia, thanking everyone and recognizing the relationships that he built with Georgia, even though he said relationships was ultimately the most important reason that he committed to Miami. So it's like, how does somebody say all of this and then not end up at Georgia?
I think one of the things listening to him, and there was a point in this where I think there was a disconnect, Kaylee, when we were talking about, the way he articulated his process, and I kind of asked him to kind of go through the timeline, like who was the leader, who was not the leader. And late, he said there never really was a spot where Georgia was the clear leader. He said it was Miami, and then Georgia jumped back into the picture, and Georgia and Miami were kind of dueling. Picture this moment, trying to take you there. The flight from Atlanta to Springfield, which is like 20 miles outside of where he lives, it's a small flight. It is 17 rows, 4 seats deep. The wings are probably 20-foot jumper away. Very small plane, and you've got Jackson, who's 6'8" plus 330 in these planes, and these are very large human. The comfort plus, the exit rows don't matter. He says he usually tries to fly first class, but you're like, if he already knew it was Miami, why do you make that trip? And one of the trip to Athens late, one of the theories that are abounding that I guess I put some stock in is that maybe it was a leverage trip at the very end to maybe jack up the initial or maybe the final bid there from Miami. Like, we don't know those answers. Again, I want to reference that by saying that's kind of pure speculation or maybe just informed thinking there on my part. Because again, we asked Jackson that question about his deal, multi-tiered escalators, and he just, which is with every bit of his right to do so, he just kind of pled the fifth and said his contract is confidential. So we're trying to learn more about this new world, a new way of doing things, but sometimes there are barriers to our reporting.
I think if you're a Georgia fan or you're in a position like us where you're covering this kid for a long time and he doesn't end up picking Georgia, then your mind starts going to like, okay, well, what did Georgia do wrong, or what did somebody else do right, or why wouldn't he choose Georgia? And my one question to him yesterday was like, how big was immediate playing time? How important was that to you? Because this is the #1 prospect in the country, according to a lot of sites. I doubt he's someone that wants to sit on the sidelines, and at Georgia, that's something that you are just usually have to do. That's the role that you accept so you can continue to develop and get better. And I don't want to give away too much. I just want to let you listen to the clip, and then coming out of it, we will talk about my instant observation. So this is Jackson Cantwell talking about how important immediate playing time to him was.
Fantastic thing for me is that like at all of these schools, I've known that I would have, obviously no school is going to just give you a spot because no school worth their salt will do that, but I have an opportunity to play early at all these schools. And I know there's many schools. I know 3 of my 4 finalists are going to lose a lot of football players next year. I know Oregon's going to lose both tackles they got from the portal. UGA is probably going to lose both tackles if Monroe goes to the draft, which I think he looks a really good player. And Miami will probably end up losing both tackles unless Markell wants to stay another year. So no matter what, I knew I was going to have an opportunity to play early, and I think that's something that it wasn't really what I planned for. I just kind of slipped and fell into a good situation with that. And I'm excited and humbled to even have a chance to play year one. I mean, I definitely know from experience that from the one high school game that I didn't play before I won the job, that it's not fun to not play. So I want to find a way to get on the field, and I'll do whatever I can to do so.
So clearly he wants to play early. That's totally fine. The one thing that stuck out to me, though, is when he's naming the different schools and talking about the guys that are leaving. Georgia's the only school that he recognizes their 2 tackles will be leaving to play in the NFL. A big controversy with this entire thing. A lot of Georgia fans are upset because he pointed to, the development at Miami makes me feel confident at what I can bring to the table at the next level. But the numbers don't necessarily back that up. So I thought it was fascinating that he only pointed at UGA as losing 2 linemen to the draft. So it's like, what do you make of everyone who's the chatter on the internet about there's no development in the school that he chose?
Interesting. Things I can add to that. First of all, Kaylee, he always had very intimate knowledge of the University of Georgia. Like, he knows about Monroe Freeling, he knows about Ernest Green. Those were the NFL tackles there he was referencing. He knows Nair Daniels came in really heavy. He knows Juan Gaston came in really heavy, and they quickly had their bodies reshaped. I mean, it's really intimate knowledge of the University of Georgia there. So I do think that they were very, very closely considered there. Kaylee also told me something in the week leading up to his decision. He said, if I play anywhere, given his height and weight and his measurables, that he would likely make it to the NFL. But he said, well, if I start at Georgia, he said it's almost an assurity that he would make it. He would be drafted by the NFL, because all those guys that start at Georgia are good enough to be drafted by the NFL. So clearly there's a track record, there's a resonation there with Jackson. As you see his field, do not adjust your television sets or your smartphones or your monitors or whatever you're watching on. Their field's actually kind of like a silver ashy gray. And that was one of the things. Kaylee and I drove by that yesterday. It's kind of crazy. It was just yesterday we drove by it.
Oh my gosh.
The day before. So like you see all this is going on. You know, obviously Jackson Cantwell, the story now is where does Georgia go on from here? But like I feel like Georgia gave it its very best shot. There were times when I definitely felt like he was going to go to Georgia. Your information sources told you he was going to go to Georgia. I think Georgia had a competitive bid, but the reports out there of the numbers stretching from, the 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 million range. I mean, folks, I want to tell you, Georgia's not going to pay that much money for an offensive tackle unless he's going to start day one and be an All-American.
So here's the thing about recruiting. When one chapter ends, another begins. So in just a moment, we'll talk about what's next for UGA at the tackle position. But first, we want to remind you that here on Before the Hedges, we are brought to you by Kroger. And you hear us talk about it all the time, but there's so much going on in the month of May. You've got graduation parties, you've got family events, and sometimes it's not always convenient to have to go gather up everything yourself at the store. I totally recommend Kroger Boost, where you can get free grocery delivery to make these events that you have coming up so much easier. You can actually try Kroger Boost free for 30 days, and with that, you can save up to $1,000 per year with 2 times the fuel points, as well as that key point, which is the free grocery delivery. So if you want to make your life easier, make sure to sign up for Kroger.com/boost. Again, that's Kroger.com/boost. With Jackson Cantwell going to Miami, 6 of the nation's top 10 offensive tackles are already committed elsewhere. So the big question is who's the top target for Georgia now?
Yeah, Kaylee, it's almost like a shoot your shot now. Like 6 of the top 10 are committed, and only 1 of the top 10 I feel Georgia has a strong relationship with, and that's Malachi Lee, the guy that took his official visit to Georgia for G-Day. And now they've got to try to get him back sometime this summer, which would be tremendously hard for a young man coming from Hawaii back to Athens, Georgia on an unofficial visit. You could sit there and do some sleuthing and say, if Malachi Lee makes another trip back to Georgia, especially this summer, well, the Dawgs probably should win that one, win that recruitment. But what Georgia now has to do is they're going to have to find the raw athlete, maybe not the polished, not the highly ranked guy to fill the need for them for their, there won't be a 5-star tackle. Ekene Ogboko, who is the younger brother of Nnamdi Ogboko, he can play tackle for Georgia. He's actually rated now as an interior offensive lineman. I think that guy is the most likely next, shoot your shot, Georgia, or, rally and marshal your resources there for another big offensive tackle, because he's a top 60, top 70 overall prospect, but there's some position flexibility there between guard and tackle. There's another guy in the state of Georgia, Chris Booker at Hateville Charter. We'll never, ever forget that practice fields there at Hateville Charter, how they make do with very little. They literally bring it up out of the dirt. But Chris Booker is about 6'5", 6'6". He's about 285 pounds now, and he's committed to Alabama. So everywhere you look, folks, tackles are very hard to find. Maybe that's why Miami was willing to pay that much, especially an elite tackle. So if for Georgia now, the options become not so spectacular. You're going to get a good football player because you're the University of Georgia, but I think it may skew towards the projection side or a guy with potential. And Georgia's done great with potential. Yeah, I want to counsel people that really the best 2 tackles they're likely going to sign in the next couple years is the one they got with Juan Gaston last year before these numbers went astronomical. And then they also got Jaw Jackson last summer. Those are the guys that you think about the next wave for tackle at Georgia. It's going to be those 2 guys, kind of regardless, in my opinion, of who they sign this year.
So here's the thing, though. It's like now not only do we have the discussion of who's next at the offensive tackle position, but clearly Georgia was willing to spend big on Jackson Cantwell. A big number was thrown around, and now you don't have to commit that money to him. So maybe not necessarily at the offensive tackle position, but where does Georgia take that money and put it?
Well, here's a forecast. I think Georgia will be involved in another one of these bidding wars for Mark Bowman with Texas. And that obviously frees up some financials to go win the bidding race there with Mark Bowman, the 5-star tight end out of California. I think Georgia's going to win that race. I do. I think they're going to do everything they can financially, and then the fit is going to be there as well for Mark Bowman. And also, if we want to be very forthright and transparent about what we're hearing, I think Georgia's going to do that anyway. I think what it opens the door for now is for Georgia to really be more competitive with Savion Hyder, with Derek Cooper, some of those running backs that were going to carry a heavy price tag as well, because I still think this class is going to be an offensive-handed, an offensive-heavy class. So really what you try to do now, and we're going to mention this again later in our show, is you want to find those elite player resources around Jared Curtis to make him better, to make him more successful, to expand his ability to make plays.
So we've spent a lot of the show talking about who Georgia didn't get and who they might be getting, but I think it's that point in the show where we talk about someone that Georgia actually got this past weekend.
Great pick.
You can't let it be overshadowed. Top 100 player, it's Jordan Smith. We'll show you his player card on the screen here. The 4-star safety out of Houston County, number 9 safety, number 95 overall, but some sites have him ranked as high as 75. He's 6'1.5", 185. What are the Dogs getting out of Jordan Smith? A lot of football player here. Kaylee, immediately he's the second highest rated player in the class, behind on the 24/7 Sports composite, behind Jared Curtis. And this guy, I talked to Milton's Ben Reeves about him, and he's like, man, obviously a player. We were concerned about him wherever he was on the field. He took 2 kickoffs back against Clark Central for touchdowns in the state playoffs, Kaylee. And then you also got to think about, he's a track guy, right? So he ran a 10.66, and the numbers are actually updated. He's really a little bit over 6'2", Kaylee, now, and he's right at 195, pushing 200. So when you've got a guy that's that big with that frame that's running a 10.66, and he's going to play defense for you, that is a win for Kirby Smart. This is a huge pickup. His coach told me, he's like Jeremy Edwards at Houston County, that he does things in practice, flipping his hips, making plays on the ball with ball skills that are just unreal. You see that speed boost? The camera couldn't even keep up with him.
You see that speed burst button right there against the Gladiators of Clark Central. You see him, he's playing in the box. One of the things on the practice field, Coach Edwards was telling me, is they're sitting there as offensive coaches. They got their fast receiver, and they see they've got Jordan in the box, and they're like, all right, we're going to cook them. We're going to get the defense here on this play call. But then all of a sudden, Jordan does these things that are just not normal. He recovers ground, he catches up, ends up making a play on the ball in practice, and they're like, how in the world did that just happen? I thought we were going to have a score. We thought the offense was going to have a big play, and lo and behold, it's a turnover or him getting a hand on a ball and breaking up a big explosive play. Look at the length, Kaylee. You don't even need to circle him. Look how big he is. He can play great near the box. He's a sure tackler. Other things I loved about this decision is Jordan Smith did it on Mother's Day, and he did it as a tribute to the very special ladies in his life. His mom, his grandmother. His grandmother actually taught him Spanish as a second language. Really, really great pickup for the Dogs. It's kind of crazy. The Jackson Cantwell news eclipses all this week, but we wanted to come back and really hammer home a lot of points about Jordan Smith. We've talked to him. We've talked to his head coach, and he will definitely be a future Dog Nation conversation on one of our shows.
And just watching these highlights, we've already seen him run 2 touchdowns back. Is this someone that could potentially be a kickoff returner for Georgia?
I think potentially, but I think what Kirby and company and T-Rob and Dante Williams are going to do is they're going to try and keep him on that side of the ball and let him master that first. And Kaylee, you're going to put eventually a Jordan Smith maybe in the same backfield, in the same secondary with perhaps Todd Robinson or maybe even the junior year of KJ Bolden. And this is a guy, the versatility is the big thing you catch with him when we're looking at his tape. He can play the star. He can play some corner. I had some coaches in Middle Georgia say that he definitely could be a corner in the SEC on Saturdays in certain situations. He also can be a great field safety or a box safety. And for those really smart recruiting folks that really study this thing well enough to do it for a living, they do point out there's a natural point here. Okay, there's Zach Fort, another great safety. You know, we're hyping up Jordan Smith as we should as a great safety. And there's already Keelan Jones. Georgia has 3 safeties in this class. There's also Ty Boogie Green at Buford as well. So Georgia's going to load up with a lot of versatile DBs, the ones that can either play the safety spots or they could also be the star in the certain select formations.
Last thing on this, you had the chance to talk to both him and his coach at Houston County. What were your key takeaways from your conversations with them?
Got one great story. So Milton, we mentioned Ben Reeves, who was highly complimentary of Jordan Smith. Milton's the best team in the state. They've been the best team in the state for 2 years. They beat Houston County handily. And so what happens? The Monday at school after that game, I think Houston County lost 56-14. The Monday after that school, Jordan is there with a couple of his teammates, and they're like, Coach, can we get a ball? There's some things we got to work on. And like, that to me, that's the box right there you want checked. Sure, the touchdowns are great. Sure, the 10-6-6 is great. He loved Georgia growing up. His family full of Georgia fans. All that's great. But when you have that little extra after getting your stuff knocked into the ground by Milton, the next Monday, you know, Coach Edwards was like, man, it was a long season. We just got beat bad. I thought they wanted to take some time off, but they felt that sting of that loss. You really want to get players that the dread and the hurt of losing impacts them more and their work ethic more than the joy of victory. And Jordan Smith is definitely one of those guys, and I think that's a guy that literally checks every box for Kirby Smart and Georgia. It was funny, he relayed a story to me that Coach Dante was the first person he committed to, and then Coach Smart eventually got word of it, and then Coach Dante told Jordan, as he says, you know what? When Kirby was talking about you committing, he says, I hadn't seen Kirby smile that big in a while. So Dawgs got a really good one this week, regardless of what happened up in Nixa, Missouri.
So that's the latest on UGA's newest commit, Jordan Smith, who will also come up in our class breakdown that's going to be here in just a little bit. Now, before we do the next thing, I do want to say this one time that this is our last episode of Before the Hedges in the studio that we're currently in now. It has been such a great run. Jeff and I have very much enjoyed being here, but next week starts a new chapter for Dog Nation. In fact, the first episode of Dog Nation Daily, it's going to take place in the new studio, will be on Monday. It's going to be a different look, but there are so many cool things that we're going to be able to do with this new studio. So we're welcoming it with open arms. We hope you do the same, and I hope that you'll tune into Dog Nation Daily next Monday to see what that new studio looks like. I think that Brandon's going to look really good in it, and I'm excited for us to film our first hedges in there.
Say goodbye to the bricks. The bricks are not going anywhere. The bricks are going somewhere, but we're not. We'll just have a brand new bag for you guys next week on Before the Hedges.
New studio, same us.
Same us.
All right, so just because Georgia didn't get Jackson Cantwell, they just got to keep moving on to the next, because they're going to host a big recruiting weekend here this weekend. Now, before we show the visitors list, we're going to talk about this a lot over the next couple of weeks, so I think it's important to kind of go over. We're going to refer to the scavenger hunt a lot, and recruits doing the scavenger hunt. What is the scavenger hunt? What do they do, and why is it so appealing for these young guys to come do this?
Well, back before the days when financials and NIL really mattered, like you see there, one of the things in the scavenger hunt, this is last year with Mason Short and I believe David Sanders. That's Zaire Addison, who eventually chose Oregon. but they thought they were jumping into something a really lot larger than a 1-foot pool. David Sanders told me a story how they all laughed at that. But scavenger hunt was really a Georgia thing where you take a visit and you do something totally different. It's a tour of the campus, but you got to find coaches, you got to find Georgia landmarks. I think one of the things Georgia does really well now is they incorporate the first 5 African-American football players at the University of Georgia. There's a monument for those guys in the plaza outside Sanford Stadium, outside Dooley Field, and the kids love it. The backstory of this has always been great, where you find puzzle pieces when you make it to a station, and that puts together a big puzzle piece of you at Georgia. Nolan Smith has done this in the past. We remember Kaylee Ringo with Sunshine, the snake that became an obscure recruiting rule out of this. But the thing about this one, Kaylee, it's a lot different, is now this is a bona fide major official visit weekend. In the years past, Kaylee, this was not home for official visits, but now Georgia is hosting, almost double-digit official visitors this weekend in the midst of their annual scavenger hunt. Now, it's not just 2026s. There'll be some really priority 2027s in town as well.
All right, we'll go ahead and show you the first page of guys that will be attending this weekend's scavenger hunt. So Nick Abrams has come up a lot on our just off the list, but then you get to the other names: Tyson Bacon, Preston Carey, Darius Gray, Travis Johnson, all names that we're probably hearing for the first time. So it's like, why the unfamiliarity with this group in particular?
Yeah, so Kaylee, you'll see this list of names, and I'll try to be a little more clairvoyant than normal I do here. I really only see Georgia coming away with maybe 2 of these guys on these lists right here. And a lot of these guys, and Kaylee asked me this question during our always informative pre-show meetings, and she said, "What's up with all these guys?" And I said, "Kaylee, I'm just gonna be honest. The only thing you can really say here is that sometimes Georgia's just a visit, and these kids all want to take 6 or 7 official visits. They want to do it at a grand, wonderful place like the classic city, Athens, Georgia. They want to take in the sights and sounds in Athens for 48 hours, and sometimes that's the case. These are a lot of players where I think Georgia needs to make a big move with in order to maybe potentially have a chance to win this recruitment. But Kaylee, it's also, and perhaps more importantly, these young men need to make a big move with Georgia by impressing them, how well they get along, the vibe, the conversations, how well they know football, to really move up Georgia's board as well. Like you see Tyson Bacon, he's in Alabama. He recently decommitted from Tennessee. Georgia's in there, but so is Alabama, so is the in-state schools, Auburn as well. Darius Gray there is a really talented offensive lineman in Virginia. He's a super athlete, plays great basketball as well. Trending right now towards LSU as well. And Preston Carey's a really great story there. He's been about 6'5" and 285 pounds since he was in the 8th grade, 9th grade. He is just a massive human. He looks like the guy that you want protecting your bank vault, or maybe making sure people have their IDs in the VIP at the club. Looks like a club bouncer already.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next page of visitors. I want to start with talking about the one at the top, or the second one. And that's Ryan Mosley, because from what Jeff and I have heard, now that Jackson Cantwell has gone to Miami, it looks like Jared Curtis's next target is to go get Ryan Mosley. Like you talked about earlier, building the talent around him, because this is going to be a really offensive-heavy class, and it looks like it starts with guys like Jalen Lott and Ryan Mosley. Yeah,
Mosley is one I think is probably the most crucial official visitor this weekend. It's one that Georgia absolutely has to win. We've talked about him a lot. We're very high on Ryan's game. Georgia has had the pitch to him for the longest time that you could make plays for us, and you can play on Saturdays key situations at both wide receiver, great explosion, great move out of his breaks right there. It just kind of catches your eye. And then also they feel like he can play safety too. So this is 6'4", 205 pounds. Great worker, phenomenal athlete, comes out of a big boy program at Carrollton High School, has made a bunch of plays in big boy Georgia high school football. He can be a weapon at X. Those guys are very hard to find. And also, Kaylee, I really think the mindset that Mosley carries about his preparation and his work to getting better, and just practice day itself, I think that's a good fit there for Georgia.
All right, and we can go back to that list that we showed you. Of course, you've got 2 wide receivers at the top in Jalen Lott and Ryan Mosley. When will Georgia go all in on a defensive lineman like Keyshawn Stance? Well, maybe not necessarily him, but I feel like there hasn't been that much D-line talk.
Well, they know they've got Seven Cloud, which is what I bet they project him to be a 2027 or 2026 starter in Athens because he's been out of high school for so long, coming out of JUCO. But the names they like Ernest Rankins a lot. They like J.J. Johnson a lot, even though Texas is starting to be a very tough competitor there for Georgia in that race. But also, while the topic of the day, the flavor of the day, so to speak, has been offensive tackles, you've also got Wilson Zyra out of Raven Gap, a 6'6", 285-pound guy. Again, is he the highest rated tackle in the country? Is he a top 10, top 15 guy? No. But that's a guy with a lot of projectionable traits that project well to be a future SEC starter.
All right, so that's going to wrap up the official visitors for this upcoming weekend. And now it's time to move on to the class breakdown. We've got another name to add to the list this week. We'll go ahead and start with the offensive side of the ball. Of course, you add Jared Curtis last week, 5-star, highest-rated signee of the 2026 class, and he's going to be looking to build that talent around him to add to the pass catchers that he already has in Vance Spafford, Brady Marchese, as well as Lincoln Keys. We'll move to the defensive side of the ball because now we have a new name, of course, that being 4-star Jordan Smith. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but I mean, you look at the board here, you've got one defensive lineman, and then you've got 3 safeties, nothing else. How does Georgia manage having 3 safeties in the class? And on top of that, they're still going after Tyreek Green.
Yeah, I think Green's another guy that you look at is say that guy's a pure nickel. I was waiting for you to say, Jeff, where's the beef? Because this looks like a sandwich with nothing in the middle. You've got the one guy, Cloud, and then you've got the guys on the back end in defense. And I mean, that's linebackers, that's the edge guys, that's the corners, and that's the just pure versatile DBs there. I mean, the class is starting to come together. Georgia has 9 commitments now, and they've clicked off 3 in basically the last 2 weeks. So this is the time of year, Kaylee. The number's at 9. I think the number will be at 19 by the end of the summer.
All right, so now we'll move on to our recruiting snapshot. We'll go through this kind of quick. Got 9 commits in the class, Jordan Smith being from the state of Georgia. Now there's 4 in-state commits. That makes Georgia the state with the most commits, but the big number, now ranked number 12 nationally. I don't even want to discuss the scenarios if Georgia lands another commit where they end up, but at some point in the very near future, Jeff and I will do a full breakdown on how does Georgia acquire the number 1 class now without Cantwell. But the number continues to climb. UGA continues to better themselves or put themselves in a better position. So at the moment, their class ranked nationally is number 12. Next, we'll get into our top targets because there's some movement. It's the domino effect. It's the chain reaction. 2 names come from just off the list to the top targets this week. You've got Malachi Lee, who you spoke about earlier in the show, but what about 4-star wide receiver Craig Dandridge? He's kind of been sitting in that just off the list for a while now, so why the jump?
Yeah, so he's a guy that I think Georgia has really started to prioritize as a receiver in this class. He's a great makeup fit. He's really fast. Some of the guys that go out to see him, some of the analysts that have been out to see him, they tell me that they think he might be the best wide receiver Georgia's recruiting, especially for a guy that can kind of play up and down the scheme and across the formation there. Was kind of the skinny about 2 months ago that Clemson might be the team to beat there for Craig Dandridge, but now Clemson, you're hearing on the trail that they might be full at wide receiver, so it opens up things with Mr. Dandridge. And I guess, Kaylee, it's just a type. He's not a top 10 receiver, although he projects to be a clear SEC starter. But the rankings and what it will cost to get Craig Dandridge is not going to be as costly as other prospects in the class. He's also inside the state of Georgia. There's a strong relationship there already. Coley was down there last week to visit him as well. I think he'll get a second visit as well. But of all the receivers you're hearing about right now, Kaylee, I think retention of Spafford would be great. And then landing Dandridge and also Mosley to go with Brady Marchese. And I think that's going to look like a pretty good core of receivers there for Curtis in this class.
All right, so we'll move on to our next page of top targets. These are the kind of the guys that have been in this situation for a while. You've got James Johnson, the 4-star defensive lineman, 4-star cornerback Peyton Dyer, 4-star safety Tyreek Green, the 4-star running back Jay Lamar, and then, of course, Lawson Lucky's brother, the 4-star defensive lineman Carter Lucky. I want to go ahead and go to the top 5 because now with Cantwell out, it moves some things around. So we spoke about Ryan Mosley. He comes up to number 5. He is the next target on Jared Curtis' hit list. And then here's the big one. This is the one you're going to have to do some explaining on. Why take Tyler Atkinson away from the 1 and put Mark Bowman there? How does Mark Bowman make that big of a jump to number 1?
Yeah, because Kaylee, first of all, we could have probably teased this in our roundup at the beginning. We could have said, you got a new number 1 in the top targets. Maybe we buried the lead there a little bit, but it's a busy show, lots of stuff going on. But Kaylee, I like this phrase. This is what I feel. This is what I've been hearing, is you want to find guys that make Jared Curtis better, that expand Jared Curtis. And Mark Bowman, the argument's been made a lot already that he's probably the most, along with Tyler Atkinson, the most can't miss prospect in this class. And I think really this is a nod towards Bowman as a guy that can make Jared Curtis cook, make Jared Curtis a lot better. And man, I have all the respect in the world for Atkinson. I think he could be a day 1 starter at a lot of schools in the SEC. I think he can get reps at Georgia game 1 if he would choose Georgia. But that's one of those, again, where you sit there and see which schools are going to make that guy a priority and where does Georgia need to make that, where does Georgia need to allocate a lot of its kind of NIL revenue share dollars as well. I think Atkinson would be a great dog, but I think a lot of other schools are going to be competitive there as well. My immediate reaction to Georgia losing Cantwell is you need to allocate that spend to the offensive side of the ball. And I really think the chief negotiations that will be helped by this between the Dawgs and the guys they want is I think the Bowman number, and I think maybe the Derek Cooper and the Savion Hyder numbers will be affected by that as well, because those are players that you're going to have to pay a premium for. And one guy that you were willing to pay a premium for, maybe just not Miami's premium, slips away, and now you can use those monies elsewhere.
So that's going to be our top targets for this week. Now we'll move on to our just off the list. So PJ Dean has been on the list, then he's come back off it, and now he's back on. So why put him back on there?
Yeah, I mean, PJ, I got some comments. I think I saw some comments online I want to address. People were like, hey, what happened with Georgia and PJ Dean? Why did he go from the top targets to just off the list? And I think he had a really strong visit to Ohio State. Maybe there's a little bit of wanting to do something different than what his brother did. But I also think Georgia needs to get to June where they work out a lot of their DL targets. That's J.J. Johnson, that's Ernest Rankings, that's Keyshawn Stansel, and then P.J. Dean as well. So they want to show exactly what they have. And I think when Georgia gets them all in town for camp, they'll be able to figure out what the DL priorities are really truly going to be for this class. Kayvon Conciaro is another guy at Warner Robins, a teammate of Houston County. Jordan Smith, guys, he has a message for Dog Nation. He says, rest assured, if Kayvon Conciaro does not come to Georgia, it won't be because of him, because every day he's telling him about come be a dog, come play with him. And Kayvon's the type of player, he's so big that the staff at Houston County tells me, like, we feel bad if we bring out another receiver with him at the same time, because Kayvon's 6'3.5", 210 pounds, and it's going to make the other guy, look like something that belongs in a shrimp cocktail or something like that. So, interesting list. Carson Baker. I have a concern now, not a concern, but I just wonder where Georgia, where Carson is ranking Georgia, but also where Georgia ranks Carson on the board. There's Jay Lamar, there's Derek Cooper, there's Savion Hyder. So Georgia's going to have a lot of options there as well. And we must admit, we're going to touch on Derek Cooper here really, really fast, Kaylee, is we did see the tweets from Derek Cooper about go Canes after Jackson Cantwell chose to play for Miami as well. One other thing, just kind of think about, file that name Nick Abrams away. There's a lot of stuff to like about him. I think Georgia's going to have to beat out Alabama in the long run for Nick, but you want to talk about a guy that, some of the signs we're seeing about a guy that would be a really good fit at Georgia. I think Nick would be a very good fit at Georgia.
Moving on to our next page of just off the list, some familiar names on the list. I don't like throwing hypotheticals out there, but, Tyler Atkinson, they're going to have to pay a lot of money for him, but they can't just have him in the class. So looks like you've got Kenneth Goodwin the second, you've got Kedrick Golden the second, Golston the second. Do you expect Georgia to pick up one of these linebackers to try to complete that room?
I think they do. I think Kedrick, we had a good conversation with him recently. That'll be a story we want to get up on dognation.com soon. That's a Georgia legacy. Everybody remembers his father, who played some great football for Georgia a generation ago. Georgia looks at him as, even though the recruiting industry sees him as an inside-the-box backer, Georgia's recruiting him as an outside backer, so there's a little bit of versatility there. He grew up going to Georgia games, and obviously those seeds were planted at a very early age with Kedrick as well. He's taking an official visit as well. The other guy I really like is Kenneth Goodwin. He's a Vegas native, really connected to Georgia assistant running backs coach David Hill is his uncle. Had some conversations with Darnell Washington about how great it would be to be a Dog, and Kenneth told me that when Jared Curtis committed, that was pretty impressive for a school that is already his leader anyway.
All right, and here's our last page of just off the list here on Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger. What about an update on the 4-star cornerback Chauncey Kennan, because that is a box on our slide that has no names in it.
Yeah. You want to think about who's the most likely corner in Georgia's class. I think it would be Peyton Dyer, but because he looks like he could play this fall in the SEC, Kaylee. He's already that physically developed. Chauncey would be the other corner in this class. Georgia's going to get an official. I think things are trending in a good spot there for Georgia with Chauncey. I think there are other schools he still needs to consider as well, though. Dre Quinn recently dropped down to a top 6, the Greater Atlanta Christian edge rusher. He has Georgia in his top 6 as well. And then Jared Smith has one of the Grizzly has one of the more intriguing Final Fours. He's got Rutgers among his Final Four, along with the Dawgs and I believe Auburn and another school. When you look at that Final Four, top 4 there for Jared, what do we say with sort of like a tongue-in-cheek? One of these schools is not like the others. That seems that way with Georgia and Jared Smith.
So that's going to start to wrap up today's episode of Before the Hedges. I want to thank you guys not only for watching us here tonight, but also for tuning in to watch the Jackson Cantwell commitment decision. Even if it wasn't a win for the Dawgs, we still had a great time going up there, and we cannot wait to see you guys next Wednesday, 7 o'clock, in our brand new studio here on Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger.
Let's go, I'm a bulldog.